Welcome to the Real Life Podcasts with your hosts, leadership and personal growth author and speaker John C. Donahue and licensed psychotherapist Lou Carfisi. The Real Life Podcast is your weekly dose of motivation, encouragement, and direction to help you live your life at the highest level.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Real Life Podcast, your online source of real help, real hope, and real life. My name is John. I come to you from John C. Donahue. With me, as always, is licensed psychotherapist Lou Carfisi, and he comes from lifecarecounseling.net. We are the Real Life Podcast, and today we are talking about vulnerability. So let's start breaking this down. What is vulnerability? What does it mean to be vulnerable, Lou?
Well, it's a difficult thing, especially for men. But being vulnerable means leaving yourself open to criticism. It means leaving yourself open to let everybody know how you feel, or at least let a certain individual know how you feel about certain things as you go about your life. And trusting that the person that you're being vulnerable with would not use that vulnerability against you. And as this has a lot of implications, both for friendships, it has it for marriages, for any kind of relationship where you want to make sure that you have an open and honest rapport with the person. Right.
So you mentioned that it's difficult for guys a lot of time to be vulnerable, and I know that's true because sometimes I find myself being on the verge of being almost too vulnerable, and I almost shy away from that. Why is it so easy almost for women to be more vulnerable than usually men?
Well, because they're more trusting at first, I think. Men, we tend to be, macho. We don't want to let people know how we really feel inside, because it gives the other person in our minds an edge in a negotiation or in a relationship.
Does it come down to power and control? Because guys like to always be strong and in control and masculine power, and I'm going to kill that animal and bring it back to the cave, and we're going to have that for dinner.
That's right. But sometimes women are just as hesitant to be vulnerable than men are, and those are the ones that have been hurt. You can only put yourself out there so many times, be vulnerable so many times in so many ways, and get hurt over and over and over again, until you're to the point where, no, I'm not going to trust anybody. I mean, that's just the way that is.
Right. It's almost a conditioned response to not be vulnerable, to be open, to have that much of yourself out there. It's almost ingrained in you after time and time again of being hurt. I've been there. I know how that feels. Yeah. So let's break down some of the situations where we can choose to be vulnerable, because when we wrote this, we made that choice to say, well, we have to choose to be vulnerable, because we could choose not to be vulnerable too, right?
Yeah, it's not always a conscious decision, but it certainly is something that we react to. When somebody expects us to be vulnerable, we don't necessarily automatically just say, oh, hey, and here, by the way, this is how I feel. This is it. We don't want to do that.
Right. Feelings can get icky. And, when you get to that point when you're having to open up and be honest about those feelings, you have that moment where you can choose to turn it off, or you can go all in. And that's a tough place to be for a lot of people. I mean, I know that I've struggled with it. I know a lot of people that I talk to struggle with it. So, it's that choice. And, guys, when we talk about being vulnerable, we talk about, we want to be strong, and really the great strength comes from opening up and being vulnerable in the appropriate situations.
Well, yeah, I think we're sort of focusing in on spouse right now.
Right.
And typically, if you don't have a lot of trust in your relationship, then you're not going to be that vulnerable, because what's going to happen? You're going to be vulnerable. You're going to let your feelings known. this is how I feel about this. This is what I was thinking. This is what I was feeling. And then all of a sudden, the other person uses it against you, maybe in a negative way, or to hurt, or to, but you said this, or but you said that. So unless you have a complete, assumption of goodwill on both sides, it's going to be very difficult for you, especially when there's been history.
Right. Now you said that, assuming goodwill. Again, we've talked about that before, and it's difficult. That's tough, especially if that history involves being hurt time and time again. That's a lot of conversations. That's a lot of, sometimes even conversations in front of a counselor like yourself, or, going through a coach like me, having those talks where you can get all the junk from the past out to where you can have that assuming of goodwill, towards each other. That takes a lot of work for a lot of people.
Yeah, it does. I don't think that women are any more likely or less likely to be vulnerable with their spouses. I think it's all about experience. But having said that, I know as a man that we have that extra added feature to our personality that says, if I'm too vulnerable, you're going to know how I feel, and you're going to, you're going to see an opening. You're going to be able to take advantage of that. So does a man and being vulnerable take away your masculinity, I guess is the question. If you're vulnerable, does that make you less of a man?
No. In fact, I would say it makes you a stronger man, because it's not taking anything away. It's just adding to, because when you've have those relationships, and as you start opening up, you start developing deeper relationships, your relationships better, you start to be more fulfilled in those relationships. It just brings more to the table. Now, but I think that, you can go to the extreme as well, but that the answer to your question is absolutely is not. I think it makes you much more of a man.
Well, it also helps with trust, because
Right.
if you're vulnerable, and you're probably the least likely of the two people in the relationship to be vulnerable, then the other person's going to say, well, look at this. This is actually happening. So now I can open up a little bit more about what I feel and what I think.
Right. That's tough because, trust is such a funky thing. It's hard sometimes to build it, and it's super easy to lose it. So as we go through our lives and we're trying to deepen our relationships and we're trying to, increase that trust, it doesn't take much sometimes to ruin it, or at least do damage to it.
That's right. And the more that we can share, the more that we can assume goodwill, the better the trust is going to go, the more intimacy there'll be in a relationship. And that's how it works pretty much.
Right. And being vulnerable in a relationship also really allows you and your spouse to be closer together. And that's not just trust. That's not just being vulnerable with each other. That's not just assuming goodwill. That encompasses a lot of different things, and fulfillment and satisfaction in the relationship. And we can start going down some of those roads if we really wanted to, but that's a big deal. There's a lot of people who are struggling with being unsatisfied, unfulfilled in their relationships. You just have to look at the divorce rate. So anything that we can do, either as the married spouse man or the married spouse woman, or however you want to look at your relationship, to bring the couple closer together is an important thing. And vulnerability is a big piece to that.
Right. And another area, besides the relationship between you and your spouse or partner, however you want to put it, is the relationship with your children. Should you be and show vulnerability to your children? And that's kind of a big question. And the answer is one of those complex ones.
Right.
Yes and no. I think it's more toward yes than it is toward no, because sometimes our children think of us as superhuman.
Right.
They think of us as larger than life. And when we can show them that we're just as fallible as they are, or anybody else is, that makes us more human, and it endears us to them. I think that that's a very important aspect. So you have to show your children respect and part of how you feel.
Right.
Except if you're going to rant or something, then don't show them that.
Well,
That's not good.
yeah, but is there a point when you get to a moment when you're being too open, you're showing almost too much behind the curtain, so to speak? I mean, you can overshare, and I think you can burden your child and confuse your child, can't you?
Well, it depends on what you're sharing. Being vulnerable doesn't mean you're going to share the dirty details of all the mistakes you've made in your life. It just means that you're going to be more vulnerable. I wouldn't share certain things that are cringeworthy moments in my past, and I know nobody else wants to do that.
Right.
So I think the answer is you share what's appropriate, age appropriate and child appropriate, and what you think is going to be okay for them to know. And there are some things that they don't need to know.
Right.
And that's not vulnerability. That's just,
right. But it's also okay if you mess up to go to your child and apologize. And, a lot of people think of parenting as, I'm the mom, I'm the dad, I'm the one that's in control. And they don't always apologize when they need to. I can think of a lot of examples of friends, myself, gone through that. And that type of vulnerability is okay, I think, to a degree. If you mess up, your kid, can be told, I messed up, right? Or
well, your child knows that you messed up.
Just admitting it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes no sense to try to cover it up by saying, no, I didn't do that.
Right.
They're going, and that's going to make you look worse.
Right.
So.
Right. All right. So, what about work? This is a little bit of a sticky wicket. What about being vulnerable at work? Should you be vulnerable on the job site?
No. I don't have to think about that. I don't think you should be vulnerable on your job. Depending upon the job you have.
Right.
But there is a special relationship when you're talking about family and children and spouses, and then you're talking about the relationships you have at work.
Right.
The relationships at work sometimes are predatory. Sometimes they're friendly. Sometimes they're casual. Sometimes it's boss, and subordinate. It's all kinds of different relationships. And if your boss is too vulnerable to you, you lose respect.
Mm-hmm.
If your boss is not vulnerable enough, then you tend to get turned off by them.
Right. And you don't trust them. There goes that trust issue again. Because I don't trust a boss who's not willing to let me see the human side, so to speak, of who they are as people. I wouldn't trust them if they always try to keep putting the positive game face on and never let me see any type of struggle. I don't think they're real. I think they're putting on a front, and I don't trust that.
That's right.
We did a really good show. I don't know, a couple of months ago, when we were talking about relationships, and we really dug into the relationships between, family and spouse and our kids. And we spend a good deal of time talking about relationships at work. And I think that, if you wanted to go back and listen to that show, I think that would be one of those ones that would coincide really well to this too. Not that we don't want you to be realistic and be human, but like Lou said, you can be vulnerable at work, and there are sharks in the water at work that you don't even realize are swimming around you. And work is just one of those odd places. It's not a wise move to be too vulnerable, because do you want to say you don't want to show weakness at work?
Do I want to say that?
Yeah. I mean, do you?
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends on the relationships and what you do in your job. You have to be who you are, whether you're home or whether you're at work.
Right.
It's just that how much do you share at work? Some things are just not appropriate.
Right.
And I know a lot of people use work to find people for support and friendship and those types of things. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm saying that it could be a bad thing because you don't know these people well enough unless you've been working there for 25 years together.
Right.
You don't know them well enough, and that information could come back and bite you in the butt.
Right. I think this is a good time to also mention, because this dovetails perfectly into social media a little bit as well. There's a lot of people who use social media as their free counselor. They spill tons of information, and they're way too vulnerable online. And that's dangerous for a couple of different reasons. One, that stuff stays on the internet forever. Two, just like Lou said, you don't know who all is reading that. I mean, yeah, you've chosen your friends in your timeline, but do we really spend a lot of time thinking about yes or no, I'm friends with that person? And you never know where that information is going to wind up, and it could do damage professionally, it could do damage personally. So I would say, just like at work, I would say to not be that vulnerable on the internet and social media, because no good can come from it.
No, it's a dynamic that's shocking. How much information we'll put out there and tell people about us.
Right.
Things that we wouldn't even tell our spouses. We put we put it on the internet. We put it on Facebook or Twitter or wherever.
Yeah.
And these people all know this stuff about us. And it's not being paranoid. I think it's just being responsible, and being responsible with your own information to protect yourself and to protect your family.
Right.
And the friends that you have now may not remain friends. They may turn into something different as time goes on.
Right. We bring up a good point. What about vulnerability with your friends? Should you be vulnerable? How vulnerable should you be with the people that you call your friends?
Well, again, the nature of the relationship. How long have you known this friend? How close have you been? How much have you shared with each other? Some people cannot help but judge you, no matter what the situation is. So if you tell someone in confidence information that could be harmful to them, it depends on the person who you're telling it to, whether or not that's going to wind up being something that's dangerous in the future, or whether it's going to be something that they can actually support you with.
Right.
So that's a judgment call. You can't have the same assumption of goodwill with your friends necessarily, certainly not with Facebook, but that you do with your family.
Right.
Your family is the whole idea of familial love is, unconditional love. If you can get that with a couple of friends, well, then you're lucky. That's good. And I hope that works out for you, but sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
So be prepared for the consequences should they arise.
Right. And there's one thing to be vulnerable and to be completely open and transparent with somebody. There's another thing to talk to somebody in a way that you can process through something you're struggling with and not give away all the sensitive information. I've got somebody that I am friends with pretty much on Facebook, and this person writes paragraph after paragraph of things I can't believe that they're writing. And it's trying to get sympathy. It's trying to get some type of direction. I don't know all the reasons that they put it, but they're completely transparent online. They're completely transparent when we get together, and it's too much. It's too vulnerable. What is going on with people like that? That's got to be a self-esteem issue and some other things going on behind the curtain, right?
I see desperation.
Yes, very much so.
It's which is scary. There's one caveat to this. There are platforms where you are safe to do this. I do some therapy on a pretty well-known online therapy company, and the information that you put there is completely safe. There's no way it's going to get out. There's no way somebody's going to be able to peek in and disclose everything. Those are not common. So you may have a chat with somebody and you think it's all safe, but it's not. It really isn't. Only certain types of platforms where the security is built in, where you know you're 100% safe, can you do that?
Now, can people find that by going over to lifecarecounseling.net?
Well, I do some online therapy. People can contact me there doing that, but I don't want to mention the company, but there's another company that very well known that you can go and do that as well. And it's the anonymity, or at least the initial anonymity, that makes people feel safe.
Right.
Which is the same dynamic that's at work when you throw it on Facebook.
Right. All right. So it's safe to say if somebody's struggling with something and needs to talk, they can reach out to you over at lifecarecounseling.net, or they can send an email to questions@reallifepodcast.com, and that can be filtered straight to Lou.
Right.
Okay. Well, what about that person that says, I'm uncomfortable being vulnerable when I want to be, but I'm just really uncomfortable?
Well, depends on why. And it depends on, excuse me, it depends on why, and it also depends on the circumstance. As I said, as we just talked about, at work, you should be cautious. In your home, with your core family, the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, if that's the circumstance that we're driving at here, then there are things that are inside you that are keeping you from trusting. If somebody says, I'm just uncomfortable, I can't be vulnerable, I'm not going to tell them, pardon me, I'm not going to tell my wife, I'm not going to tell my husband, I'm not going to tell anybody how I really feel about this, because I don't trust them to use that information in the right way, or in the way that it's meant to be used.
Right.
So it's a trust issue.
Right. And that could be caused from situations in your past, people taking advantage of you. And then one of the fascinating things that a lot of people don't think about is you might not have ever experienced true vulnerability in your growing up life. You might not have ever seen that in the business vernacular. You might not have ever seen that modeled for you. So it's hard for you to be vulnerable in the appropriate way because you've never seen it done in an appropriate way.
That's right. It may not have happened in your home when you were growing up. Oh, you don't tell them that, or you don't ever mention this, and that's just not it's not the way to really get the intimacy in a relationship that you need. A lot of people mistake intimacy for things like sex. It's not about sex. It's about the ability to say and be who you are in front of someone who you love and who loves you without fear. And that when you do that, it should grow the relationship even closer.
Right. Is there a way to work on this? So if I'm struggling with being vulnerable, maybe I've not seen it modeled, and on top of that, maybe I've had some really bad experiences, and I struggle with sharing. I struggle with openness. I struggle with, that intimacy issue that we've kind of talked about. How would I go about working on that? Is that something that has to be done in counseling? Can I read a book? How do I fix this?
Well, maybe a book is an appropriate way, but counseling, yes, if it's to the point where it's affecting your life negatively or affecting your relationship negatively. But just in general, think about what's the worst that could happen if you, let's say that you just go down another level and say, okay, I'm going to let this amount of vulnerability be shown. I'm going to say these things. What could happen? Well, if it's just a small risk, you're going to have to, you're going to have to put a little leap of faith there and do it. And then let that go and see how it works. See if if that works out okay. If the person doesn't use it against you, if the person accepts it without judging you, then you're going to be freer to do it more. It's a matter of trying and giving an initial, discomfort within yourself to try to get yourself to be vulnerable.
Right. It's kind of like that movie from, gosh, I guess the 90s. What About Bob? Like baby steps towards the elevator. You take a baby step. You dip your toe into the pool of being vulnerable, and you give it a try, and hopefully it's a successful try. And if it's not successful, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be vulnerable. You just need to reevaluate. I talk about a lot in those morning motivators that I do, where we need to learn from our failure and learn from our successes. We dip our toe in, we try it. That feels good. Okay, we can try it again. Go a little deeper. And I think if you're trying this, is it a good idea to have that conversation with your spouse? Like, hey, I'm giving this a shot and I might not get it right. Open communication kind of thing, or is it something that you just do and just let happen?
Did you mention child? Is that what you said?
No. Just with your spouse mainly.
Oh, with your spouse?
Right. So if I'm trying to be a little bit more vulnerable with my wife, let's say, do I talk to her about it and say, hey, look, I'm trying to be a little bit more vulnerable. I'm trying to be a little bit more open. Or do I just take those baby steps, and if it doesn't work, no harm, no foul?
I would say try it. And if she doesn't respond to it, then try it again.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to do it. You're gonna have to stick your toe in the water, as you said. But that doesn't. You can't expect them to act the way that you'd like them to act.
Right.
And that's it with everybody. Know. But if you're one that doesn't seem to share, when you start doing it, people will notice and say, "Wow, you've never shared things like that with me before."
Right. And it's great when you get that positive feedback, but unfortunately, not everybody gives feedback like that. So, don't be discouraged. What now? Is there any difference when you're doing that with your kids? I would think kids would be much more resilient. So if you have something that's awkward, you could talk about it with your kids, and it would be a little bit more. At least I would think that doing this with your kids would be great, because they would provide that feedback. Because kids don't seem to have that filter. They'll just tell you straight up. That's
right. They do. I tell my son everything.
Right.
I don't tell him the dirty, excuse me. Sorry about that. I tell him everything. I tell him everything that I feel, how I see things. And he reacts pretty well to that. I don't tell him the dirty, dark secrets.
Right.
Not that there are that many, but I don't tell him those things because it really doesn't have a need to know, and it wouldn't help the relationship. But yeah, I mean, kids are. If you show them that you're going to be vulnerable, and you show them that you're going to be open and honest with them, they're going to react to that.
Right.
And I think it's going to warm the relationship up.
Right. So a very practical idea, if you're struggling with this, would be, maybe you find somebody, share a personal story, and be honest. Share a personal story, not anything major, just a personal story with someone that you consider a friend. I would probably start with your spouse or your children.
Right.
And then maybe if that works, or even if it doesn't work, you could try this. You could share your feelings about something. So a lot of the times I tend to be a lot more critical, and I do it as a joke. A lot of times I'm joking around, and I'm, I do a lot of trash talk when I'm watching TV, and it kind of has a negative effect on my wife. So the other day I was saying, "Oh man, that's so beautiful. Oh, that's so awesome." She literally stopped what she was doing and looked at me, and she's like, "Look at you complimenting people and stuff. You go, boy." And it was a moment where I was testing the waters on some of this, because I was trying to change some of my behavior, because that trash talk is not helping her in my being vulnerable and telling her, oh, that's beautiful, or oh, that was really touching. That was a nice moment. So I followed our little steps. I did a baby step and it worked out well. And I'm going to keep making more baby steps so I can be more vulnerable. So this stuff really does work.
Yeah, it does. All you have to do is do it.
Right. And then when you take those steps, make sure that you're constantly reevaluating, make sure that you proceed accordingly. If you get shut down pretty hard by somebody, you might not want to keep trying that tack. If it's your wife, that's a different story. There's different levels of that, but just be aware of that the people that you're talking to have had a past with you as well, and they might not be as receptive initially. But don't stop. Don't let that stop you.
That's exactly right. Don't let that stop you. But again, it depends on the nature of the relationship. If you have a good relationship and you want it to get better, and you notice that there are some things in your relationship where there's a little trust lacking, try this. Try being vulnerable. Try, doing something that you don't normally do, like share things and tell them, I really, this is the way I feel about this. Apologies are always good too.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things to remember is when you're doing these things, if you're speaking your opinion and you're telling your feelings, remember that you're speaking to another human being. So there's a difference between telling someone that you maybe don't like something and doing it in such a way that it hurts them. So just be very sensitive to the wording. And I'm trying not to make it too complicated, because I don't want guys to freak out thinking, oh, I've got this whole list of stuff. But just be aware, if you're a brisk person and you start trying to be a little more vulnerable, and you want to share your feelings with something, the first thing I wouldn't do is to pick the one thing that's been driving you crazy for 30 years. Maybe you find something a little bit lighter to start with until you get comfortable with being vulnerable, because you may wind up starting an argument that you didn't intend to start. So that's good. That's go ahead. I'm sorry.
The benefit, the absolute benefit to this is to be able to have your home be what it was meant to be in the first place, which is a place of respite, somewhere where you can go and be yourself, not have to filter every word you say, not have to worry about the things that you say being twisted, held against you, turned around. If you don't have that in your home, then you have a problem in your relationship.
Right.
And you need to address it.
Right. Absolutely. All right, my friend. Anything else that you want to say and finish out this little talk about vulnerability?
No, that's it.
No, I think it's good stuff. As a guy, I know we tend to be not so vulnerable, and I'm a big fan of it for guys. For ladies, we do the best we can sometimes. So I'm excited that we're bringing it up, talking about it. Not a topic that you hear a lot about. So I'm very glad that we picked up on it. If you've got any questions, comments or concerns, maybe there's something that you want to reach out to Lou or myself, you can always send us an email at questions@reallifepodcast.com. You can always find us on Facebook at Real Life Podcast, or on Twitter at Real Life Cast. And we want to make sure that you reach out to us and get in touch with us. If you need help, if you need Lou as a counselor or me as a life coach, we want to make sure that you get the help that you need. Right, pal?
That's right.
All right.
Contact us.
That's right. We want to also do two little bits of housekeeping before we call it a day. Make sure that you join us every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on blab.im. We do a little 15 to 20 minute chat about different things, and it's a great way for you to join us live. You can chat with us. You can come on towards the end. We open it up, and you can come talk to us and talk about whatever you want to talk about. If you want to, that's a great place to get one-on-one with a life coach and a counselor. We do not do live sessions within the blab, but it's a great way for you to get in touch with us and come watch us do what we do live. And then next week, I believe we're talking about fear. So that'll be interesting. We're talking about vulnerability, and you said it earlier. It really touches on fear. So we're going to dig a little deeper into fear next week. So thanks a lot for listening. Thanks a lot for watching. And remember, real help, real hope, real life here at the Real Life Podcast. See you next week, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Real Life Podcast. Find out more information and sign up for the Real Life Podcast newsletter at reallifepodcast.com. You can also learn more about our hosts, Lou Carfisi at lifecarecounseling.net and John Donahue at johncdonahue.com. And remember, live your life to the fullest. And as always, we want to encourage you to choose to be awesome, because when you choose to be awesome, you will be. Have a great week, everyone.